Hello and welcome to Channel's Book Club. My name is Olakunle Kasumu, and it's great to be on this show where we have been discussing all things books, and we are still doing that. What a year 2024 has been. Tough economically for Nigeria, difficult economically for Nigeria, and no doubt about that. Everybody felt the pinch. Everybody felt the heat throughout the year. Very difficult for Nigerians, but here we are. We made it to the end of the year. That's one bright news. We made it to the end of the year. But how has it been on Channel's Book Club for us in 2024? Business as usual on the show, talking to writers, authors, publishers, booksellers, book lovers, and just generally having a good time discussing all things books. This particular episode is dedicated to taking you down memory lane 2024. Let's remind you of the incredible authors and writers that we featured on this show and what they had to say describing their books and the topics, the themes around their books and life generally. Enjoy this. What's the story behind this? What inspired this?
Most, if not all of what is in that book has come from my public service experience of 21 years. And of course, beyond what we are able to show to the public in terms of what we do and what we say, we have backroom conversation amongst colleagues, with friends, with staff, and even with family. So, and that's where this came from. Of course, the conversation about our country doesn't end in the office. It gets back home. It gets discussed over drinks. And when I express some of these thoughts, the next reaction is, why don't you just write this? And I say, maybe it's not right now. I'm still serving. Some of them might sound like an excuse. Let's try and do as much as we can. But more importantly, in some of the positions I've canvassed publicly and I've had pushback, I haven't had the kind of pushback that showed me a superior argument. Again, so I thought that it was important to do this. And as I said, I think in the preface or in my acknowledgement somewhere in the book about how I read Chinua Achebe's book as a very young man, and some of the things that he spoke about are still with us.
The trouble with Nigeria.
Yes, are still with us. And now how I have become a parent from being a young person. So it means that another generation, my children's generation, are still dealing with the problems that we were tackling 30 years ago. And I thought it was important perhaps to help put a lens, a sharper, what I hope is a sharper focus, an intellectual and rigorous focus on the way we have approached those problems and our understandings of them. And maybe we might then perhaps get more closer to the solution instead of just provoking a diagnosis. Yeah. Not just what people say, but to say what do the facts show us are the problem.
We are too quick to conclude that a child is dull. And it's not just a teacher problem. It's also a parent's problem, parental issue.
Yes.
Parents and teachers are too quick to conclude that a child is dull simply because the child is not bringing home the kinds of results that the parents expect or the teachers expect.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying. And you have now pointed out that many children have learning needs that teachers are not even aware of.
Yeah.
And unless we're aware of those needs, we can't tackle those needs. Yeah. And if we can't tackle those needs, we get the results that we usually get. And then we conclude that the child is dull. Yeah. Is that a good summary?
Absolutely. You know, you hit the nail on the head, Kunle. You see, to digress a little bit, the book is actually not just for teachers. Well, primarily it is for teachers, but also for parents, like you rightly said. Because like I said in the beginning, there's a dearth of understanding. There's a lack of knowledge around children with learning needs. You know, our teachers lack the necessary training. So it's not really their fault. No one's taught them. You know, within their education or their trainings, they don't have any provision for children in mainstream school with identified learning needs.
Underlying mainstream school.
Mainstream school, you know, and also same for parents as well. And this is where this book is absolutely essential. It's actually desperately needed. And that's the word, desperately needed. They don't know they need it, but they desperately need it. Because this book covers the principles, the core principles of inclusion, right? For each identified learning need, there is a corresponding strategy to help remove that need, that barrier. Now, if a child is not making progress, right, that's usually a barrier in front of that child. Now, that barrier can be visible or invisible. It's up to the practitioner, the parents, the teachers to identify that barrier. Because if you identify the barrier, let me go with what's in the book. You have to know that child. That's the first step. Yeah. If you know that child, in terms of getting all the data about that child, it might be behavior data, parents' views or guardian or carers, the child's experiences. Yeah. It could be some progress report. Know that child.
Know the student you wrote here.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know that student, that child.
Then identify the barrier.
Identify the barrier. What is stopping that child from accessing the curriculum and offer? Now, once you've identified it, because as you know, a problem stated is half solved. Once you've identified it, the next step is then to come up with bespoke, and I use that word bespoke, customized, prescriptive, and personalized strategy, because each child is different.
At times, we're in the field, and we genuinely believe we are talented.
Correct.
But the whole world knows we are not.
I know.
I mean, right?
You're correct, yes. You are correct. In that case, that person might be gifted in some other field that the person really wouldn't have known. Just a question of going back again. This workbook will help that kind of person.
Yeah, the workbook at the back.
Yes, it helps you to reflect genuinely on the kind of talents you have. It helps you to think deeply. By the time you think deeply and answer those questions, your real natural talent will definitely come out.
Yeah, it's very practical because you ask questions.
Each chapter has 5 questions to help the reader understand and internalize the lessons of the chapter. And then if you notice, each chapter seems to have a lesson. Because Dr. Joe Jordan will ask someone or people to summarize what was learned at the end of the chapter and then to see if there are lessons to be picked. So that will also guide the reader that in this chapter, let's say remain in your field, these are some of the lessons distilled by the audience. So the book is kind of complex, almost complex, because of, like I said, the style that I use, that intertextuality is really very good in this sort of things. The conversation flowed into the other. You know, there's a segue from one dialogue to the other. So that makes it very interesting and almost unputdownable. You want to see what's going to happen in the next chapter.
It was a structured, organized business.
Absolutely.
Sanctioned by the government of England.
Absolutely. Correct.
And the government of England, which was also at that point in time, more or less synergized with the Church of England.
Yes.
Basically.
Indeed. Indeed.
So.
Indeed. And this is very important for our people to understand because, you know, we often get caught up in a conversation. People say, we were selling our own people.
Yeah,
now,
that's another thing.
It is so important to understand that this was a structured enterprise. It wasn't, I want people to understand, it wasn't as if we here had for sale signs over our people. They came, initially, the first boatload that Hawkins got, he kidnapped them off the
About
coast.
300
a whole
slaves.
boatload, 300 slaves,
Yeah.
300 people.
people.
We were now enslaved, and he now sailed off with them and sold them in Haiti.
Yeah.
And it was the profits from that. They were so huge that now convinced them that this was the way to go. So more and more ships were now diverted into that trade. And now it became more sophisticated because the coastal peoples now became wary. Whenever the ships were coming in, they would run further inland. But some of the ones that they had taken away, as always, there will be some who will be good workers.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those will be co-opted. They now have the language, they can go in and speak to the peoples, and they were sent in to reassure the coastal peoples that we're not after you. We're not going to touch you. Work with us. Here are the guns.
Gin, rum,
gin, guns.
So you argue that, this thing about, our people, if our people had not been involved in selling their own brothers, nothing would have happened. So you argue that that's not accurate.
Yes.
You argue that they were manipulated, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were coerced to get into the business.
Absolutely.
That's your argument.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a nonsense narrative that was spun that we ran with because we had not done our own research. Well, what became interesting was that when abolition came, and the book explains the real reasons for abolition, that it wasn't a change of hearts, it was a change of thinking. And it was a change of thinking forced upon the slavers by the Africans who had revolted, in particular in Haiti. It was the Haitian Revolution that now made it clear that they can't sustain the trade any longer. And that's when they started thinking of abolition. And in the course of the abolition debates, because they didn't, those who were profiting from the system, because any political system has winners and losers, those who were profiting from the system weren't going to roll over and say, you take my daily bread away. They were resisting, they were holding on. And so the arguments in Parliament were actually very revealing. One side arguing that it's evil, it's got to go, etc. The other one says, no, 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 we need it, it must continue, etc. And in the course of those exchanges, evidence spills out as to how the trade was really being instigated. And I remember one of the prime ministers who said that it is we who are instigating the trade. It is we who have the demand. It is we who supply the weapons for them to go and fight other groups and capture them, and in order to supply our needs.
There are three classifications of human races on Earth. The Caucasian race, which is Europe, America, Britain, and the allied nations. The Mongoloid race, which are the Asians. Then the Negroid race, which is Africans, and the black people all over the world. These three loose classifications of the human race coincide with and harmonizes with the three sons of Noah, who gave birth to the current world after the flood that destroyed the entirety of the human race. Noah gave birth to three children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem gave birth to Asians, the Mongoloid race. Japheth gave birth to the Caucasian race, Europeans, America, Britain, and so on. Ham is the father of Africans and the black people all over the world. The essence of this book now is a sequel to the other book, Africa, the Glory, the Cause, the Remedy. And the question has been, why are we different from other races? I mean Africans. Starting from our color. Why are we black? Why are we poor? Why can't we manage ourselves? Because failure of leadership in Africa is comprehensive across virtually all the nations of Africa. Leadership had failed over centuries and decades. So there must be something wrong. Then why are we poor? Why were we enslaved? Why are we humiliated and dominated by other nations and so on? I used to ask myself these questions. And these were the questions that gave rise to these two books.
If you've read about the Penkele Mess, yes, you will see the cover of the book. It was that picture of him sitting down with carvings beside him. And there's a little crack on the steps and stuff like that. So because the book had covered a time where he lived in Ibadan way earlier, between 46 when he went to GCI and 65 when he went to hold up radio station, I had assumed that the house was one of those houses he lived during those times. And in the book, you would realize he said it was a house in Agodi where he colonized. You know, there was an empty house. He just went there and started living there. And there was a snake he caught and all of that. So I assumed that was the house that was on the cover of the book. And apparently when I told him much later, I realized he thought the same. So I'd read the book and assumed that, okay, that's one random place. And then somebody told me one day that, no, that house is in UI, it's the Bohemian Road. And I was like, how can it be? The book doesn't cover a Bohemian Road, it covers a different time. And no, he said, no, it's there. And he took me there and I saw the place and I was like, First I didn't believe, but I then looked at it well and I saw the steps and I saw the crack still remaining. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. So that for me became the first insight that, okay, there's so much memory of UI, of Soyinka in UI that I didn't know, that so many people didn't know. So I wanted to write it in the book. So when I was writing the book, I sent him an email saying, oh, I discovered a place where you used to live in UI on the cover of Ibadan. And he said, no, that was a different house. It's not in UI. So I was like, oh, so even the man himself doesn't even remember the book. So I sent him a photo that I had taken with the crack in the concrete. And he said, oh, this is so interesting. So I sent him another video I saw on YouTube, which was him being interviewed after he returned from prison, sitting on the steps of the house. And I was like, oh, yeah. But he said he doesn't know why his memory fixed that interview in another totally different location. So that was also very interesting to me that, okay, Soyinka himself, he may have, misplaced memory of this house. So it would be interesting to explore as an interesting subject. So I wrote him back and said, this photo you took on the step, it would be nice for you to come and do it again as an adult, to do it before and after. And he wrote back and said, not a ghost of a chance. I was like, why is this man, I thought he was joking, like, not a ghost of a chance. Maybe, you can't even get him anyway to sit down for an interview, not more place of bringing him to Ibadan. So I let it go. That was 2018. So it was then last year, I was speaking with somebody from Open Society, and I was like, Soyinka will be 90 next year. There's a house in Ibadan that I know that had so much history, because I then connected it also to the Civil War, because that was where he lived when he got the job as a drama professor. And then when he was arrested, he went to jail, he came back to the house, and then he went on exile. So he stayed there for this very short period. So I told Open Society that it would be nice to do a documentary on that house. I want to explore it and try to ask people a number of different things. And it would be 90, it would be nice to have a documentary around when he's 90. And they were like, that's a nice idea. So they provided funding, and I started having those conversations.
So you attempt here to introduce us to certain terms, not introduce us, we all know these expressions, but you sort of like explain each one of them and share your views, your thoughts on them. The first one is Godfather.
Yes.
Everybody talks about Godfathers in Nigerian politics. So let's read this together. Can you please read Godfather, what you wrote there? The Godfather is real.
The Godfather is real. He is not a myth. You will find people who tell you a Godfather is not necessary for you to succeed in politics. If you agree, you have failed already. You don't have to take my word for it. A Godfather doesn't have to be rich. Most of them are. Old, a lot of them are. Or very loud, the louder, the less effective. A Godfather is someone who gives the word and it gets passed down the value chain. You need to get on his radar, or on the radar of someone who knows him. The most important currency you need when you are relating with the Godfather is loyalty. Forget about how brilliant or competent you are. All those can be found elsewhere.
You can't talk about Africa today without talking about Africa in the past. And oftentimes when we talk about Africa today, it's always a question of why can't we get it right? But what I wanted to show by going back to our history is to say, it's not a question of why can't we get it right, is where did we begin to go left? Because for significant, before the 15th century, my interpretation of African history, we were actually producing thriving kingdoms and empires that were not only relevant in the African context, but globally as well. We had the Aksum Empire, the Malian Empire, Songhai.
Great empires.
Yeah, you name it. We were producing it. And the question is, well, what began to happen? And so what you see with African history is when we came into contact with new systems, specifically economic systems like capitalism and different people and globalization, etc., our evolution went from being kind of self-determined and determined by ecological factors to being determined to how we responded to these systems. And unfortunately for us, we haven't been adept at responding to these situations, right? And so I explained it in the context of slavery, how slavery went from a global enterprise where all kinds of people were slaves to becoming almost exclusively an African enterprise in the sale of black bodies, right? And then we went from slavery, went to colonization, how within 10 years the entire continent was colonized, then neo-colonization. And so what you begin to see is that to the extent that we've taken, or we've had missteps, is because we haven't been paying attention to these significant geopolitical shifts. And when you don't pay attention to these geopolitical shifts, you tend to be victims to them. And so this is the message overall in the book, which is to say, hey, we've had 500 years of not being strategic, not thinking long-term, not paying attention to these dislocations in geopolitical affairs. If we're going to be successful in this century or even survive in this century, we're going to have to rectify that.
Your book titled A Father's Pride. Now, from here, you sort of like moved on from younger kids to older kids with this story. But this is a book that not just older kids read, even adults. I was reading it and I was like, I'd like you to talk about that book because I found it interesting, reading the story. A young girl living with her aunt who was abusing her seriously. And it's a very common story in our society.
Very common, very, very common. And you see, most times when we talk about domestic violence, people will just think about their husband, abusing the wife, But there are so many children, like you rightly said, who are passing through that. And, because they are so vulnerable, they may not even be able to talk. Like you see that little girl who was, because her father died and her mom was looking for help and then offers the half-sister, okay, why don't you take my child to Lagos, thinking that the child will have a good stay with the, with the aunt. But unfortunately, it turned out the other way. So you see so many children being abused is underreported. Underreported, yes. And, sometimes even neighbors, they don't do enough. Even, we have to be observant, look around, kiss around, when you see a child who is always gloomy, who is always unhappy, you have to ask questions, We are not doing enough in society to bring these things. Sometimes they'll say, no, probably you don't want to, spoil the relationship we have with that grown-up who is abusing that child. But you have to do something because, what if that child has died? And so many children have, passed on through this thing. Some of them, grow up being psychologically damaged. They live with this trauma throughout life. So that is the essence of that book, that domestic violence is not just about a husband and a wife. A lot of children are being are being abused, especially house help.
Well, that was a trip down the 2024 memory lane. I hope you enjoyed that. It's always fun for us just talking to these writers and authors on the show. And 2024 has ticked so many of the exciting boxes for us. Well, There's still time to enjoy with your family and friends this celebratory season. Have fun, enjoy those good times, because at the end of the day, life is about the wonderful memories that we keep. So create those memories right now and let those memories stay with you over the years to come. So spend time with your family, your loved ones, your friends, and have a really, really, really good time. Merry Christmas and compliments of the season. My name is Olakunle Kasumo. Remember, one great book can change your life. Bye-bye.